Good morning, everybody. You guys doing okay? Welcome to summer. Welcome to River City Church. And if you're a guest with us here this morning, my name is David Tillman. I'm one of the ministers here at the church. And we're so glad that you're here, that you're joining us for what is the second week in our series, A Walk Through the Psalms. So as we jump in this morning, I want to tell you a little bit about a walk that I took this week as I was kind of working on this message. I was inside working on the message, and then I decided I needed a break, so I took a step outside. And the place where I was, there was this lake that is kind of close to the place that I live, and I was walking around this lake. Now, I stopped under some trees because it was roughly, if you were outside this week, you know, it was about 200 degrees outside. And so I stopped under some trees, and I took a picture. I want you to see what I was looking at here. Around this lake. I mean, beautiful, beautiful lake. And this is like the only tree that's on the side of the lake. And as I sat there and I was grateful for this shade, I started to kind of look out and see if there was anything else going on around the lake. And what I saw is that there was one other person that was crazy enough to be out there in the heat of this day. It was noon, and I'm standing out there in this heat, and it would eventually that day get to almost 100 degrees. So there was this one guy, but he was working a lot harder than I was, and I began to become intrigued with this guy. I built like a whole story around this guy. Do you guys ever do this? Okay, only me. It's weird, but I built a whole story about who this guy was while he was out there. He was fishing, but that wasn't what was strange. There's people fish in lakes, but he was fly fishing. And I don't know much about fishing. I'm not a fisherman, but it seemed like odd, a little out of place. So he's out there, and it was kind of cool. He obviously knew what he was doing. And his method was he would stand there sweating, and he would catch nothing. And for about 5 minutes, he would stay in one place. And then when he caught nothing, he would gather up all of his stuff, and he would move like 30 or 40 feet this way around the lake. And then he would do the exact same thing for about 5 minutes, and then he would move. And I don't know, you guys are a lot better at fishing than I am, so you know whether that's a good strategy or not. I have no clue, but I was just intrigued with what this guy was doing as he was kind of working his way around. And what happened that I thought was so interesting, standing there under the trees, and he's over there, I can just see him, he's working so hard. And here I am under this tree, and fish start jumping out of the water right here in the shade. Right here. He was just here, but he didn't stay long enough, and now he's gone, and the fish are jumping out of the water. It happened like twice, and I thought, oh, well, that's kind of interesting, and then it just kept happening, and fish are jumping up out of the water everywhere, and I'm just tripping out at the irony of this situation, that this guy with all of the gear, and all of the skill and all of the technique, he is working so hard over there. And here I am, a non-fisherman, standing under the tree, and the fish are like trying to jump out of the water at me. I mean, it was so much that like if I had my old Snoopy Zebco that I had when I was 6 years old, did anybody have a Snoopy Zebco like me? Anyway, it was really cool, and I could really haul them in. If I had some worms in that guy, I could have pulled all of these fish in there. And I just thought about how ironic it is that he's over there working so hard, and here's all the fish right here just a few feet from him. But as I stood there thinking about that, probably because I'm a preacher, I thought about how incredibly picturesque this is. That's not the right word, but it's such a great picture of how I think God sees me sometimes, and maybe you sometimes. Like here we are over there, and we're working so hard, we're sweating, and we've got all the technique, we've got all the methods, and we're trying to find our happiness. We're trying to find our joy, and we're working super hard. Maybe we're trying to find satisfaction at work, or we're trying to find satisfaction in pleasure, or maybe even just trying to make ourselves right before God. And we are working so hard, and then right here under the shade, it's like God is watching us in our effort and saying, oh, this is incredible how hard they're working, but if they would just come to me, they maybe would find everything that they're looking for. And you know, the good news, I think, for us is that God is infinitely more kind than I am. Because I stood there in the shade, and I thought about for a second, like, I should go over there and tell this guy that all the fish are over here. I should do that. You guys thought, like, why didn't you do that? Well, the way I rationalized this is it was pretty far. And it was also really hot. And I also thought, why would he listen to me? Like, I'm not even a fisherman. I'm just taking a walk. So why would he go, oh, sure, I'll grab all my stuff, guy, and come over there under the shade where you are? But God is infinitely more kind than I am. So he just doesn't sit there and watch us and scoff at all of our efforts, but he is a God that in his love, he invites us to come to him and find everything that we ever wanted and needed. Now, how does he know that? Well, he knows that because he designed us in such a way that we're never going to find the happiness and the fulfillment that we need, that we long for, because he didn't design for us to find it outside of him. He designed for us to come to him and find the fulfillment of everything that we ever wanted and everything that we needed. It's in him. And he invites us to come to him. So today, this message and this text that we're going to look at is that invitation. It's an invitation from God to come to him and find our happiness and fulfillment in him. Today we're going to be in the first chapter of Psalms. And I know it's the second week, but I wanted to go back to the beginning, where we started, here in Psalm chapter 1, because what Eddie told us last week is what the Psalms are, if you aren't on the same page with us, that what they are is it's a book of songs that ancient Israel, that they would use in worship of God. And so there's 150 of these Psalms. Now, the first one is kind of the one that sets the stage for all the rest of them and contains the theme of everything that's going to follow in all 150 Psalms. So as we jump in today, if you were to look at it in your text, in my text here, it says above Psalm 1, the two ways. And I can't really think that there would be a better title for this message than that, the two ways. And what we're going to see is that there's two ways that we can walk through life. And the choice that we make determines whether we will be happy in life, whether we will have true, lasting happiness and fruitfulness, the life that God desires for us to have, or if our life will ultimately be fruitless and wasted. Those are really the two dynamics that are set out here in Psalm 1. So as we walk through this, I want you to kind of evaluate, okay, how am I living my life and how does it line up here? Psalm 1:1 is how we're going to jump in, and this is how the psalmist begins. By the way, we don't really know who wrote Psalm 1. It might be King David, or it might be his son Solomon. That's kind of what tradition says, but this one doesn't have an attribution at the beginning of them. As you're looking through Psalms, sometimes it'll say, like Psalm 3 says, a Psalm of David, and it tells you like when he wrote it. This one doesn't say, so we have to kind of just guess. In case the one person that was wondering that, I just wanted to clear that up for you. Psalm 1:1. How happy is the one who does not walk in the advice of the wicked, or stand in the pathway with sinners, or sit in the company of mockers. So you see, that's a pretty gripping first sentence, isn't it? So what the psalmist is saying is that I'm going to describe for you what happiness in life looks like. In fact, I'm going to describe a happy person. And he starts off by saying, I'm going to tell you, first of all, what a happy person doesn't do. If you want to be happy, don't do the following things. Or if you want to be miserable, do these things. Either way, you do this. He says that happy people don't, number one, the first thing they don't do is walk in the advice of the wicked. So when happy people are going out for a walk, they don't walk along with a wicked person and say, hey, what do you think about the situation that we're in right now? And what direction do you think that we should go? Oh, that's an interesting idea. Let me think about that. Now that seems like kind of a dull moment there at the beginning, but this can be really seductive. Is that we want to gather, especially if you're a researcher like I am, you want to gather all the information, and some of the people that will give you wicked advice are experts in whatever their field is. Hey, listen to me, I'm an expert. Let me tell you about how to have happiness in life. Let me tell you how to find fulfillment in your job. Let me tell you what the key to everything is. And so the psalmist says, happy people don't do that. They don't walk in the advice of people who are opposed to God. And what's cool here is that you see this, there's a progression to it. He says they don't walk in the advice of the wicked, and they don't stand in the pathway of sinners. So there's a progression to it. We're walking along, and then all of a sudden we're standing there, and now this person is having a conversation with somebody whose life is opposed to the path that God would have them to be on. It's gone from kind of a casual conversation to one where you're standing. Now, as I thought about this, the way to understand this week is This has happened to every single one of us in the room. You're at the grocery store, or you're at the gym, or you're in between classes, and you're having a conversation with somebody. You guys know how this works. And you met them there, and you're like, oh, we're going to continue this conversation. And as you walk to the parking lot or to your class or wherever it is that you're going, you get outside and the conversation's still going, but you know right now, like I parked this way, and it feels like this person wants to go this way. And so we're kind of pulling apart. So in order for us to continue this conversation, we're just going to have to kind of stand here. And so you're standing in the middle of the parking lot. It's usually not that safe. Cars are kind of going around you. You're saying, I'm sorry. That's the picture of what's happening here. That we were walking in the advice of the wicked. Now we're sitting there standing in this conversation. And then the next step in the progression is that we're sitting at the seat with mockers. And the word mockers there is now this person feels comfortable sitting down with people that not only are going in opposite direction from the one that God would want them to go, but they are comfortable openly mocking God and making fun of people that follow God. And this person is sitting with these mockers. And that's how this whole progression has gone. And Paul would later say in the New Testament that bad company corrupts good morals. Have your parents ever told you that? You ever heard this? That's actually scripture. He's saying, hey, this is how this progression goes, and it goes this way every single time. There is a progression to it. And happy people know that it matters who you surround yourself with. Have you ever found yourself sitting in a place with people that you might describe as mockers, or even just in a situation that you don't want to be in or didn't see yourself in? You're like, how did I get here? How did this even has this happened to you? And then you can like kind of trace it back and go, oh, okay, well, it didn't start with me sitting here. It started way, way, way back here when I took some bad advice, or I began to go a bad direction in my head. And now I'm here seated in this place that I don't want to be. So that's the picture that he paints for us. Happy people don't do this. And then he's going to give us the positive. So what do? Verse 2. Instead, his delight or her delight is in the Lord's instruction, and he meditates on it day and night. This is what the happy person does. Delight in the Lord's instruction and then meditate on it constantly. It's a picture of when you have something and you keep looking back to it to see, like, am I on the right track? I'm looking, okay, still seems like we're good, and they're constantly looking back to it. It's a picture of trust. And I don't know about you, but does that strike you as a little bit odd that they delight in the Lord's instruction? It strikes me as a little weird because I don't know about you, I don't generally delight in instruction. I don't delight in, man, I just wish that somebody would tell me what to do right now. I wish that somebody would just constantly tell me exactly what I'm supposed to do, because their ideas are better than mine, and I want their ideas, and so I need that. But this person, the happy person, welcomes that in, but it's because there is a background of trust there. If you know, on the other hand, that somebody knows what's best, if you know that that person has your best interests at heart, if you know even beyond that that person loves you and wants you to flourish, then you will listen. And that's what's in the background there. This person is delighting in this instruction because of the person that's instructing. As I thought about that this week, I thought about like our GPS. Nobody ever looks at their Maps app when it tells them where to go and go, man, that dude is so bossy. Or maybe it's a girl. I don't know which voice you've picked. Mine's an Australian man. I don't know why. But I never sit there and think, man, this app is so bossy. It's always trying to tell me what to do. And the reason is you just assume that what the advice that you're getting is right. Or at least it's more right than you would be if you did something else. And what you know as you hear it is, I can do something else. I mean, nobody's making you turn right in 100 feet. But if you don't, you know what's going to happen. There's going to be some type of a delay, and it could be a long delay. You don't really know. I mean, is there a road to turn around on? There may not be. So there's going to be some type of delay. So we listened, we received that in. And so it is with this person with God. They don't see his advice as intrusion, but welcome it in, because this person realizes that he's not a taker, but a giver, that he wants to give to them. And in the next verse, I love, he explains what the future of this person is. So we've seen what they don't do, and then what they instead do, and then what the future. So if this is you, someone that delights in the instruction of God, brings that in and makes sure that you're staying on the same path, this is your future. Verse 3, he is like a tree planted beside flowing streams that bears its fruit in its season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever he does prospers. So the psalmist is saying it's very predictable what's going to happen here. The end for this type of person that submits themselves to God's instruction, and I love how this is passive, that like he is like a tree that is planted, that God is able to take this person and plant them, and they're planted near streams of flowing water. And that word, streams of flowing water, in Hebrew, it's an irrigation canal. So it is a canal that's been dug on purpose. It's an even better picture of, so God takes this tree, this person, and plants them, and then digs a channel of water that comes and supplies and nourishes this person as they grow. And then what's the result of that? This person prospers and produces fruit in their life, fruit that is specific to the season that they're in. So God provides for this person, plants them, nourishes them, produces the fruit, whatever is needed for the season that is a blessing to them because, hey, I have a purpose in God, and then everyone around me is blessed because God is producing fruit through my life. So we have one job. That's what he's saying. You have one job, is to humble yourself under the word of God and allow him to plant you, nourish you, prosper you, and grow fruit through your life by walking in wisdom. So in the next couple of verses, he's going to contrast that with the one who ignores. So that's the future for the person that delights in God's way. And then in the next couple of verses, the future for the one that ignores and mocks God's instruction. Verse 4, the wicked are not like this. Instead, they are like chaff that the wind blows away. Therefore, the wicked will not stand up in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. So he says it's not like that with wicked people. Instead of having life, instead of producing fruit, they are not alive, and they're not useful. They are like the chaff. And you guys probably know better than I do what chaff is, but if you take wheat, and I've never done this myself, but I've seen it done, that you take wheat and you rub it between your hands and this paper floats off into the wind, and that's chaff. And what the psalmist is saying is that that's what the life of a wicked person is like. It's worthless. It doesn't help anyone, and eventually the only thing that it's really good for is to be burned. So he's saying that's how to live an unfruitful life. And the worst thing, he says, it goes on from there. The progression is not only is their life useless, but in the judgment, he says, that there's no defense. It was when they stand before God, he says that you're separated from the assembly of the righteous. What that means is that before God, that there's not ambiguity. Because we're very used to this. We do it ourselves. Is we say one thing, and then our hearts treasure another thing, delight in another thing. But that works in front of people sometimes. I mean, eventually I think even people figure it out. But before God, it never works, because the God that looks down and sees our heart says, no, you say that with your lips, but your heart is far from me. And he says that's the way it's going to be for the wicked, that God's not going to be fooled by that. So they're going to be separated from his people. And then verse 6, he gives this summary, this conclusion. And in this conclusion, there's one more comfort, and then there's one more warning. To the person that is walking in God's way, there's this comfort. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous. And I love this, because this word, watches over the way of the righteous, the word that's translated there from Hebrew means the Lord is knowing the way of the righteous. Isn't that cool? That constantly you're walking in his way. He knows where you are. He's knowing your way. He's knowing what you need. He's knowing how to give it to you. He's knowing what he wants to produce through your life. He's knowing what struggles that you have. He's knowing your heart and knowing what you need, and his desire is to give it to you. And then it says, but the way of the wicked leads to ruin. And so the one more warning is that every other path other than God's path, which he calls wicked, he said all of those roads lead to ruin. There's one road that leads to life, and that's to come under the authority of God. And then every other road, which seems like a lot of roads, but he's saying it's just one where you say, no, I don't want that. I want what I want. And he says, okay, you can take that road. But the problem is that road leads to ruin at the end of it. In my family, there's a pretty legendary story. I'm sure you guys have legendary stories in your family, right? That you get together and you tell, hey, remember that funny time when mom did this or dad said that? Well, in our family, there's kind of a legendary story of when we took a trip one time and we were going to Papa and Gigi's house. Now, you guys know Papa and Gigi, right? My grandparents, and they live in, this is going to sound like I'm making this up, but the place that they lived in was called Rector, Arkansas. Is anyone familiar with Rector, Arkansas? Yes, there's one person that knows where that is. And well, two. And you would think that that's made up, but the thing that's really cool about going to Rector, Arkansas, it's pretty easy, is you just go west over the river, and then eventually, and I don't remember, I was a kid, but you take a turn and you go north. And then eventually, like an hour and a half later, you end up in Rector, Arkansas. And the way that you know that you're getting there is that you pass through some pretty cool places too. It's kind of like an all-name team drive. You go through Cooter, Missouri. That one's one of my favorites. You go through, let me see, Piggott is another awesome one. Marmaduke is another town that you drive through. And we would know how close we were getting because we would go through these different waypoints. Well, this day when we were taking the trip, we didn't make any of those waypoints because we did go across the river. That part we made, but then we just kept driving. The reason is because I was telling jokes that day. Now, my jokes weren't always good, but apparently this day they were pretty good. I was doing, I think, some imitations. I did some impersonations. I did my grandparents. I did pretty much everybody in my family. George Jones was one of my favorite ones to do. One day I'll do that for you. Michael McDonald was another one. So I had these impersonations I was doing. For some reason that day they thought it was really funny. My dad thought it was really funny that he missed the turn. And so we just keep driving and we keep driving. And we didn't really notice until mid-joke, I'm kind of like, hey, Dad, this doesn't really, are we going a different way? Because we always go the same way. And he said, no, we're not going a different way. I'm like, this looks different. And it turns out we never made the turn north. And we just kept going. And we didn't have an atlas. We didn't have GPS. So we had no clue how to get where we were going from where we were. Now, because of the time it was, what we did know is that if we went to the rest stop, that there was a giant map on the wall at the rest stop. And we finally found one in Forest City, Arkansas. And I don't really know where that is. I've never been back. But I remember that day, what a gift that was, as my whole family, we just stood there in a line and we just stared at the map in Forest City, Arkansas, trying to figure out, like, how did we end up here? And we're over here, and it's like a lot of roads here. There's not a lot of them between here and there. And so we kind of we had the paper out, and we're just writing it down, trying to figure out, like, man, I don't really know. And we wrote some stuff down, and eventually, like 2 hours later, we pulled up at Papa and Gigi's. We got there. But I remember thinking in that moment, as we're stepping back from it, man, it's great that we have this map. Because if we didn't have this map, we'd be like in serious trouble. That's a lot of stopping at gas stations to ask for directions. And you know, this morning, this psalm, as I think about it, this is a gift, really, that we've been given. Because we have the opportunity this morning to just press pause and to step back from the picture and say, where am I headed? And am I on the road that leads to life? Or somewhere have I just enjoyed a joke too much and just ended up over here at Forest City? I hate for Forest City to be the wrong place. If that's your hometown, I apologize. I just mean someplace other than where you're trying to go. And I think God would just want us to step back this morning and just to kind of evaluate this. Because the thing that's great with God is that, unlike the interstate system, you may miss a turn and then it may be like 50 miles till another exit. You can't control that. You can't turn around because there's state troopers everywhere. It's probably not a great idea. But with God, every moment is an off-ramp. Right now is an off-ramp. And God would say, you don't have to drive 10 more feet down that road. You can get off right here because the start is just to come back to me. And to go back to my original analogy, I know I'm mixing these up a little bit and I apologize for the whiplash, but I'm just thinking about if you're out there and you've got the rod and the reel and you're standing out in the heat and all you have to do is drop all of that. And if you do, I think what you'd see is that there's a God who's standing up on the hill and his face doesn't look like this. His face looks like this and his arms are open wide. And I think he would say something like this, Matthew 11:28, when Jesus said this just came to my mind this morning as I was praying about this. When Jesus says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I know you're working so hard, but look, take up my yoke and learn from me, because I am lowly and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. See, when David was delighting in the Word of God, all that he had really was the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the books of the law. And he was delighting in the words of God because he saw that one day something was going to happen out there in the future, that this Messiah was going to come. And so he said, God, I want to follow because I can't wait until that day when the Messiah comes and walks among us. And then here we are 2,000 years on the other side of Jesus, the Word made flesh that came and dwelt among us and walked among us. So we got to see what God looks like with skin on and how he moves among us. And that Jesus says, come to me. Take my yoke on you. Learn from me. Walk with me through life. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. So as we close, I think there's probably 3 groups of people in the room this morning. I know there's some of you that are saying, you know what, I've experienced that. I've come to Jesus. I've experienced the forgiveness that comes from coming to him. And I realized that I couldn't save myself and I pretty much made a mess of my life. And so I came to him and I gave him my whole life. And I found on the other side of that forgiveness and peace like I've never known. And so now, as I look to his words, I say, God, I want to know more because I know what you've done in my life. And I know that you know the best, and I know that you love me, and so I want to walk in your way. And that's one group of the people that are in the room. Thank God for that. The second group of people maybe that are in the room this morning are probably the most miserable people because I've been there. I know what this feels like. You have a relationship with God. And there was a time when you felt the closeness of God in your life. You know that you're forgiven. You know you were adopted and you are his child, but somewhere an off-ramp was taken, and not the good kind, but the bad kind. And so you find yourself, even as you think about it this morning, you're like, I think I'm kind of walking in some bad advice, or I'm standing maybe in it, or maybe I've already taken a seat and I'm comfortable over here in a place that I never thought I'd be comfortable. And the reason I said those people are the most miserable is because you can't enjoy where you are because the Spirit of God inside of you says, this is not who you are. You're my child. Get up out of the seat, go back. But you're not going back, and so you're miserable in life. And he says, today, though, is an off-ramp for you. You can get up and you can come back to me. And then the last group, I think, would people maybe be somebody who would say, hey, most of this is foreign to me. I don't have a relationship with God. I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't even know there was a God that loved me and that would invite me in. I thought that standing out here with my fly rod was all there was, and I'm working super hard. And he says, no, you can drop all of that because you'll never make yourself good enough. You'll never find what you're looking for, but if you'll come to me, you'll find more than you thought could ever exist. And the end of every single one of your longings in me. And all you have to do is come and lay that down and confess, God, I've messed up my life. I've sinned. I've gone my own way. Maybe not the worst way. Maybe not as bad as other ways that I could think of, but I did go my own way. And so, God, I want to come back to your way today. Will you forgive me? Will you save me? Will you put me on your road? And he will today. Will you pray with me? And I just want